Do you want to just describe your boat and its rig?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is one of the more unique rigs out there, which I love. So the name of it, the style of boat is, so it's made by Hobie, and its full name is a Hobie Mirage Adventure Island. And the best way I like to describe it is a sailing trimaran kayak. Um, and that it basically, you think of just your plain kayak, and then you put two outboard pontoons on it, and you stick a sail in the center of it. Its dimensions, it's 16 feet long. And then my beam is about 9 feet. And it does have a dagger board that sticks down to about 2 feet, but you can, go completely with and put it up, and you now have a draft of, 3 inches, which is pretty cool. But you can't go completely shallow because you do have a rudder you have to work with, and the rudder is about 18 inches, but you can even like put the rudder halfway up, so you can still go through like super shallow water. But the sailing in of itself is pretty interesting, that it's a furling mainsail, and it's just one sail on the boat, which makes it really, really easy for furling and unfurling. You can do it in like 10 seconds or less. That also allows you to do reefs in it, but it does have battens in it, which gives it a nice rigidity. And it also, they have other points that you can rig it to either go directly behind you, or you can also go off to the outboard amas to give you a wider reach on those. They also make a spinnaker for it. I didn't have a spinnaker, but they do make them. And I find that shocking, but why not? And then beyond the sailing itself, it does also have a pedal drive system. And this is a patented system by Hobie, although a bunch of other companies, once Hobie figured it out, a bunch of other companies were like, aha, we're going to make slight modifications to that and make our own. So like uh, Town Country Canoes now make their own version of this pedal drive system. But it basically, it's a back and forth pedal rather than like a bicycle style. And that translates through gears down to the bottom with two fins that go back and forth, kind of think like penguin fins. And it's a really efficient system because on top of that, if you push the pedals against each other, they push them up against the bottom of the boat, so then you can glide nicely through shallow water, as well as it reduces drag. But it's also nice that if you want to help increase your streamline, you can keep them together on top of your dagger board to then keep you from slipping as well.
Nice.
So, and the more updated versions of this pedal drive system are getting really fancy. I didn't have this, but the version after mine, there's two more versions after mine, but the next version after mine have automatic kick up. So basically, if you have them down and you run into like a rock or something, they'll automatically push themselves up and not bend the rods.
Nice.
And the new, as well as at the same time, that same version, if you pulled a lever, it flipped the fins around and you could reverse. Now I could pull my fins, like completely unsocket them, turn them around and put them back in reverse. But just having a pin to flip them was pretty cool. And then the newest version, you pull a lever and it spins the fins 360, so it allows you to turn in place.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is very cool. But then I also think of like and you had a question about long distance trips and how to prepare for that. My mind immediately went to, there are so many more things that could break. I like the simplicity of my pedal drive system. But it's a great vessel. Hobie has not designed it for long distance trips, but there is a community that I'm in on Facebook of a bunch of us basically trying to figure out how to rig these things for long distance trips. And I've really become a leader in that community of how do we rig these things for long distance trips, of what kind of attachments do we put on it, how do we rig tents, how do we do food, how do we do water, all these different kinds of things. And there's people all over the world, so it's a really fun community to work in.
Did you have any major equipment failures during the trip?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. I definitely had some equipment failures. My biggest one happened when I was going into Beaufort, South Carolina, crossing Port Royal Sound. That the wind ended up against me and the tide had switched, and with both of those, it also created 4-foot swells. So not a great recipe there. And as I'm trucking my way across, all of a sudden I feel a little tug, and poof, the two pedals on my Mirage drive system, the back one had completely sheared off. And that, and actually that was this week's YouTube video that went out highlighting that. It was devastating for me because I was already mentally drained from the tough conditions, and just throwing this in there just was really bad. Thankfully, I had all my sailing experience, and I had enough wind to at least get me close enough to the marina that then I got towed the last 100 yards in to the marina, because I was downstream and down current and downwind from the marina. So I got a dinghy to pull me in there. So that was definitely a major equipment failure. I had a GoPro go overboard once. I was in a marina then, so I actually
lost.
Yeah, so I literally threw on my snorkel mask and dove down to the bottom of the marina and found it. The GoPro was fried. However, the SD card survived. So I still got all the footage off of it. I had a drone, and the drone went on the fritz and crashed and flooded. Still got the footage out of that one. Let's see, what else broke? I had my rudder handle cracked, so I had to get a new one of those. I got a crack in the boat, that it was on the top side of the boat, and I think it had happened because I had been camping, since I had been sleeping on it with the heat during the day, and then me putting pressure on it when I was sleeping, kind of pushing it outward. They got a crack on it, but a little bit of 2-part plastic epoxy, couple layers of that, good to go.
Love it.
I'm trying to think. I think that was most of my equipment failures. And like
Go ahead.
I would say in the grand scheme of things, that's like not horrible in my opinion. Like, I made it back in one piece, and the boat made it back in relatively one piece.
Well, and it was a pretty grueling trip, really. I mean, that's a long ways. How long is that?
So I actually just, because I went into I have like a log here, and I realized I hadn't updated my final mileage. So I just finished it right before we started this call. And based on this, my final mileage was 1,165 miles.
1,165 miles. Wow.
It's a good trip.
Yeah.
I know you calculated one day how many times you pedaled.
Yeah.
I remember that from Facebook. Do you know what you did for the entire thing?
So I don't know what I did for the whole thing. I know if I was doing a full day of pedaling, I was averaging around 55,000 pedal steps in a day. And I was on the water. So start to finish was 107 days, but that was not straight. That was, with a bunch of 0 days in there. And if I just did a quick little bit of math here, if I say did 100 or 20, we'll say 20 0 days, and a third of that. So we'll say 30 days of excessive pedaling.
That's a lot.
That puts me at just a touch over 1.5 million pedal steps.
And how much, do you have a feel for how much of your progress was by sail and how much was from pedaling?
So I tried to have the sail out as much as possible. And so even if, I got an extra knot out of sail, I'll take it. Also, half the time it was nice because I would try and put the sail between me and the sun when I could, which really would help sometimes. But I probably would say most of my days I tried to sail as best I could. If I knew that I was going to have the wind directly on my nose, I just didn't go that day. Because at the beginning of the trip, I tried to do that a couple of times and absolutely burnt myself out. That I specifically remember a time when I was going from Tomoka State Park up to Palm Coast, Florida. It was like a 12-mile day. It really wasn't that far. and it took me 10 hours to go that, because I had a 15-mile-an-hour headwind all day. So after that day, I said, nope, not doing that anymore. And so I would have to say that I probably was pedaling 60% of the time. And on the days that there was good wind, I took advantage of it. I would skip, overnights of like, I would have, on good wind days, I would end up where I was planning to be at the end of the day at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I was like, well, I'm not going to, waste another 5 hours of good wind. So I'd head on to the next day's location. And so like, there was a point from that when I was going from Charleston to Georgetown, South Carolina. I had budgeted 4 days to do that, and I did it in 2. That I had a 30-mile day and a 33-mile day back to back, just because it was great wind and it timed well with the tides. And I was like, all right, let's go. And cruised on up, which was great because I had stayed in Charleston a few more days than I would have liked because of, not great winds. So it was nice to make up for the lost time.
Yeah. What were your favorite stops?
Oh man. New Smyrna Beach was a lot of fun. Because it was my first town back on the water, round 2 of this trip. And it was a really good stay. I mean, the weather sucked. It was, rain for days and days and days. But it was a really good community. It was a small marina with a really good community. The marina managers were awesome. Good food, good community there, lots of artists, and also a really good brewery. But that was definitely a great town I want to go back and visit. St. Augustine was awesome. That was my first time to St. Augustine. Absolutely want to go back. Georgetown was great. Really enjoyed Georgetown, South Carolina. I'm trying to think what other places I really enjoyed. Swansboro, North Carolina was a great town. It was just a lot of towns I had never been to before that, there were just exit signs on highways. That now once I had like gotten into Georgia, it was a lot of towns some of the towns I've been to before. Like I had lived on Jekyll Island, great island, expensive island, but great island. I had lived on Tybee for a while, so I knew Tybee and Savannah. I'd also, I'd gone to school in Charleston. I knew the Myrtle Beach area. But then a lot of the stuff in between, I hadn't been to Hilton Head before. Not exactly my style of island, but interesting. Visited Dafuski for the first time. That is a trip, because especially Dafuski and Hilton Head are right next to each other, and they could not be more polar opposites of islands.
Yeah,
we're familiar with that.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine.
Indeed.
So I can see some hardcore sailors saying, oh, a sailing kayak is, that's not really sailing. But when you were here in Georgia, we met you at a couple points along the way and saw you sail across Doughboy Sound, and you were screaming.
Yeah.
What's the fastest you got that boat going?
So according to my GPS, and I gotta believe this was with the current because it was above hull speed. With the current, I maxed out at 7.8 knots.
Yeah.
And
I did the calculation for a 16-foot long hull. Your maximum theoretical hull speed should be 5.4 knots.
Yeah. So, and I hit my max was 7.83. But I hit 7.8 twice. I hit 7.83 once and then 7.81. I hit that 2 different times. And I feel like I was flying both times. But it was interesting talking with other sailors and just other boaters in general, that when I came in, because, oftentimes I would actually come in and stay in marinas, which is hilarious in of itself, that I come into a marina and, I'd call over the radio of, this is, sailing trimaran time and tide coming in for dockage. And they're like, all right, do you need a hand docking? I'm like, not really. Do you need Do you need gas? No. Do you need pump out? No. Do you need electric? No. Do you need anything? Nah, just a safe place to type. Great. All right, cool. Go over to the dinghy dock. We won't charge you. Cool, thanks. That wasn't always the case. But I would come in and I would see, you know, anyone that's sitting on their boat, I get this like head on a swivel as they'd follow me in of like, what is that? And I never really met anyone that was like, you know, off put by me doing it. Most people were like, that's crazy what you're doing. And that, you know, I have mad respect for you, which I was like, cool, that's good to know. And it was particularly people with the big boats that they were like, you know, I've got the super luxurious thing and like, I feel like I'm roughing it sometimes. So I've got, you know, what you're doing is super cool. I was like, you think I'm cool? That's awesome. Thanks. So it was really interesting to talk with, you know, sailors of all different backgrounds and skill levels with all sorts of different boats. Although there was one point when I was in Charleston, I got the chance to sail on a racing trimaran, a Freedom 40 racing trimaran, carbon fiber, America's Cup style. It was owned by the son of the owner of MJM Yachts. And so it's this, you know, massive racing trimaran, and they're like, hey, we're down a person today. And it was a friend of the Charleston sailing team. Do you want to go out? And I was like, of course I want to go out. And the wind was at a serious clip that day. And we went out beyond the breakwaters, and we clocked 35 knots on that. And that was insane. But then when they were telling me like, oh yeah, it's just a bigger version of your boat. And I was like, no. This is not a bigger version of my boat. But then afterwards, the guy saw my boat and he was impressed with my boat. And I was like, thanks. I could almost fit underneath your boat, but cool.
So that, you know, one of the impressive things, you know, being able to hit that speed with the amount of weight that you had to carry with you. I mean, you're basically doing a long distance cruise. So you had to carry around a lot of spares and equipment and everything else, water. Do you know how much weight you had in the boat?
Yeah, so I actually measured this before I went because there was a weight capacity on the boat and I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. And so according to the boat, all persons plus gear should not exceed 440 pounds. Well, they did in kilograms. It was 181 kilograms, but roughly 440 pounds. And I came in at around 170. So that means that, you know, I had a little under 300 pounds to work with. Which was then I would start to weigh things, like I weighed my tent and, you know, how much a full week's worth of food was. And I came in at under 150 pounds of equipment. So really, I actually was pretty thankful of how much weight that thing could carry. And I actually honestly have to thank my camping background for thinking of what I actually needed. Because I knew if I was new to camping, I would have been bringing way more things than I actually needed. As well as when I first started to do this project, I did a practice run down in Tampa Bay, Florida, in February of 2019.
I remember that. No, yeah.
2020.
It was just about when I saw you and I was like, well, this guy, oh my God, it's this guy.
Yeah. So yeah, no, it was February 2020. I did a 4-day trip as kind of a practice run from Tampa down to Sarasota, just to basically shake things out, figure it all out. Because I'd been putzing around. I had the boat up here in North Carolina, but that was without any gear on it. So this was my first time loading it up, seeing how things were, and did that. And then really I got a second trial run when I then started in Miami, made it 2 weeks, and then had to pull off the water. And then at that point, I was able to even assess again of like, well, what do I actually need? How can I readapt things like that. And so in terms of gear weight, it actually worked out pretty well. That I didn't have too much worry. The only time that I started to worry about, me sinking down into water is when I started to get a lot of water on board. And that only happened when I was burying the bow a lot, because there were 3 hatches on the boat. The front hatch is the only water, I would say it's a water resistant hatch. It is not a waterproof hatch. The center and the back have a nice gasket and a nice tight seal. The front one is just held down by bungees. And so if I'm burying the bow constantly, a little bit of water is going to get in each time. Now I kept a bilge pump on board that if I got really bad, I'd, turn into the wind furl the sail and pump it out. Or I just wait to the end of the day. But I could definitely feel, if I was bringing on a lot of water, I could start to feel it, that it would start to get sluggish. But in terms of, food and water, I carried, about 3 gallons of water, at a time. And that would usually get me, about 3 days. And if I knew that I was going to be going longer, I might get an extra water bottle, or just, be more selective about how I use my water. And I would carry about a week's worth of food. And most of the food I was doing were dry goods. So, oatmeal and instant coffee and instant rice. And then I would also have canned proteins like canned chicken and canned beans, things like that. And that just slowly would evolve over time, but my overall diet stayed pretty consistent for the whole trip.
And you anchored out a lot of nights too, didn't you? You didn't just stay in marinas.
Yeah, it was about I basically would try and swap off that. I would, be in a marina, anchor out, marina, anchor, marina, anchor. And yeah, that was a learning curve. Because just like sleeping on the boat, anchoring the boat is not something that Hobie designed the boat to do. So I had to figure out how to exactly do that. And I ended up figuring out a really good way of doing that I did a 2 anchor system. I did one off the bow that at the cross members, I would tie it off there and then run the anchor line through the pad eye up at the front of the boat so that I could, stay into the wind. And it particularly helped that once I brought up my rudder and brought up my dagger board and pulled out my pedals, there was no current holding me underneath. So literally I didn't have to worry about any drag in any direction. And then I'd throw a smaller anchor out the back so I'd keep from swinging as much. And I actually found that by the end of the trip, I preferred doing that over pulling it up on a beach and camping on a beach. Because since I designed it to sleep on the boat, I also then had inadvertently designed it so that everything could be reached when I'm on the water. So if I wanted to go up on a beach, I had to take everything out of the boat up onto the beach, unpack everything. And then when I put it all back, now everything's covered in sand. That being out on the boat, I had everything right there within, and I never really got claustrophobic on the boat. Like, I mean, it was small, but it was open, so I never felt like I was cramped anywhere. And so but when it came to anchoring locations, I had to be very selective, because that boat does not do well in any kind of swell while anchored. It can take swells just fine when it's underway, but when it's anchored, it hates any kind of swell. So I would particularly find just that tiniest little protective cove wherever I could. And I could get in places that no one else could. That, I'd go in and anchor to a place where I would literally get super shallow, hop out of the boat, walk up, throw the anchor out, and then, tighten it up that I'm in, 6 inches of water, but then I'm completely protected. And so that really helped. And I had some of my best nights out there that, it was quiet. And particularly when I found protected areas, that also meant I was protected from the wind as well. There wasn't always. There was a couple of nights that the wind picked up a good bit, and having a tent on there basically turns it into a small sail. But having the ability to sleep on the boat and anchor the boat and do that together of sleep on the anchor, just gave me so much freedom. A lot of what I was doing, that was one of the things that I made a requirement when I was planning this trip, is I didn't want to have to be limited to come to land to sleep, because particularly once you get north of Florida, finding places to come up on land to camp gets really hard. Down in Florida, you've got, hundreds of spoil islands you could go on for free that are just there for anyone to use. After Florida, there aren't really much in the way of sandy spoil islands. It's all marshland, and most of it's privately owned. So then you're kind of stealth camping, and having the public, viewing that this project did.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that. And so being able to anchor out just was a no-brainer for me. And so it was a fun problem to solve.